He was just a kid in seat 12F. To the businessman beside him, the flight attendants moving down the aisle, and the dozens of passengers stretched out across row after row, he looked like what everyone thought he was, an 11-year-old traveling alone, a little nervous maybe, but ordinary in every way. His sneakers were scuffed at the toes, his hair was cropped close but uneven, and sitting on his lap was a dog-eared comic book he'd read 100 times before. He munched on the crackers the flight attendant had given him, every so often glancing out the window at the endless clouds below. Just a boy on his way to visit his grandmother. Just ordinary. But in the seat pocket right in front of him was a folded piece of paper no one could ever be allowed to see. On the corner of that page, in block letters most adults would never believe, was a single word, Eagle. That was his call sign. Not a classroom nickname or a playground invention. A military call sign. A name earned from hours of testing machines that most adults had never even laid eyes on. Of course, nobody on United Flight 2178 knew that. Why would they? To the woman knitting 3 seats up. To the teenager staring at his phone across the aisle. He was just another child trying to pass the hours at 37,000 feet. But the illusion of normality had only minutes left to live. It started small, a vibration so subtle even the veteran crew in the cockpit didn't feel it right away. But the kid in 12F did. His hands froze on his comic. His ears picked up the faint irregular rhythm. The kind of uneven hum that spelled disaster to anyone trained to listen for it. When the plane shook again, just a little harder, he knew it wasn't turbulence. He knew something deep in the engines was faltering, and that meant time was running away from everyone on board. In the cockpit, Captain Hannah Doyle squinted at her gauges. "Mike, check engine 2. Her first officer leaned forward, jaw tightening his graphics on the screen bled red. Alerts flashed. Within minutes, both engines began slipping toward failure like falling dominoes. The flight crew began running through the checklist every pilot memorizes but prays never to use. Across the cabin, passengers stirred uneasily, though most told themselves it was just weather. Only the boy in 12F sat completely still, shoulders tense, his secret eating at him. His instructions had been drilled into him 1,000 times. Never reveal your identity. Never breach cover, no matter the urgency. But the groan of failing engines wasn't theoretical. It was happening. Then came the captain's measured but anxious tone over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical issues and we'll be diverting. Please remain calm." Passengers exchanged concerned looks. The businessman beside him forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a hiccup, huh, kid?" The boy didn't answer. His palms were sweating. A voice inside screamed, "Don't break cover." Asterisk, but louder than that came another voice. "If you stay silent, 162 lives may vanish into the cornfields below." The decision was ripped out of his hands a moment later. NORAD screens lit up alerts as a distressed aircraft signal reached Defense Command. Standard procedure. Scramble fighters. Prepare for emergency escort. And in a secure room, as the passenger manifest scrolled into classified databases, alarm sounded. An 11-year-old boy, matching one of the most restricted files in Air Force history. Top clearance. Code name Eagle. For the commander on duty, the question wasn't whether it was real. The question was what this meant for the fate of the falling plane. Minutes later, with thunderous roars, 2 F-22 Raptors streaked up into the sky, slicing toward the descending jetliner. Passengers gasped as sleek gray silhouettes appeared through the cabin windows, holding formation like watchful hawks. "Why are there fighters?" one traveler whispered. Fear rippled through the cabin. And then, fate itself knocked on 12 FSC back. A radio transmission cut through every channel. Asterisk, United 2178. This is Raptor 1. "We need to speak with Eagle immediately." Asterisk, the words hit like a lightning bolt. Every eye turned. A couple of passengers actually laughed nervously. "Eagle? What is this, a movie?" But the boy in 12F felt his stomach twist. Cover blown. Secrets exposed. The flight attendant froze in the aisle, glancing from row to row. "Which seat is he in?" she asked in disbelief. Then her intercom crackled again. "Eagle, if you can hear this, please come to the cockpit. We need you." The businessman beside him slowly turned, realizing the impossible. They mean you, he whispered hoarsely. The boy closed his comic and stood up. The sound of children usually fades into background noise, but not when every adult in earshot is suddenly comprehending that the fate of their lives has been tied to these small sneaker steps down the aisle. When he pushed open the cockpit door, Captain Doyle's eyes went wide. She'd expected an officer, maybe an engineer from some defense contractor, not a boy who looked like he should be learning fractions. "Are you?" she stammered. He nodded once. "I'm Eagle. Show me the panel." No arrogance, just a steady certainty that silenced the questions hanging in the air. First Officer Mike Torres choked out, "You're a kid." The boy's tone did not waver. "I'm the pilot you need." He scanned the failing readouts with practiced precision. Airspeed, altitude, fuel bleed. He wasn't startled by alarms. He was cataloging them like puzzle pieces. His training was different and harsher, starting before muscle memory had been dulled by age. He breathed slowly. "We can make it to Lincoln Air Force Base, but we have to change how you're flying this. This aircraft has to become a glider." The captain lifted her eyebrows. "That's not in our manuals." "It's not in any manuals," he replied, "but it works, if you trust me." Outside the cockpit, the Raptors flanked them like guardians. Inside Air Traffic Command, generals and analysts leaned over consoles, eavesdropping on the exchange between veteran adults and a child whose voice carried strange calm. To them, the data was unambiguous. This boy had logged more test hours in next-generation cockpits than anyone else alive. His brain processed speeds differently. His size allowed him into machines still in development, and his instincts were beyond what simulation models predicted. Now, he was using those instincts not inside a prototype, but in a wounded Boeing 737 with families on board. What followed was a surreal ballet. The captain, guided maneuver by maneuver, began practicing techniques no commercial airline had ever considered. Long, shallow banks, energy-saving dives, harnessing gravity not as an enemy, but as an ally. "Ease the nose, let her breathe," the boy instructed. "You're flying weight, not engines." His words had that paradoxical mixture of childlike voice and hardened test pilot precision, making the adults feel both unsettled and strangely reassured. Down below, emergency vehicles massed on a runway, lights flashing. Crowds gathered as news bulletins spread. 2 Raptors escorting a crippled jet. Nobody yet knew about the boy orchestrating the descent from inside. But in the cabin, whispers flew like sparks. "He's a pilot." "He's a kid pilot." "What's going on?" Some passengers prayed. Some filmed shaky footage, and others stared out the window at the fighter jets like angels of steel. 10,000 feet. The boy issued clip commands. "Keep the glide angle shallow. Do not chase altitude. Trust the speed." The captain obeyed, sweat dripping at her temple. First Officer Torres muttered under his breath, "This shouldn't be possible." But the boy answered firmly, "Possible or not, it's the only way." At 5,000 feet, Raptor 1 called in, "Eagle, conditions are steady. Path looks good." And the voice of the fighter pilot carried something unexpected, respect. Honor was given not to a general or colonel, but to a child who had seized command. Eagle simply replied, "Stay with us on the ground." The runway stretched ahead, a dark ribbon lit like a beacon. But crosswinds began pushing. The boy's instructions cut swift and sharp. Rudder correction, tiny. Don't overreact. Let the body settle. The worn aircraft creaked, fighting physics, yet responding like it wanted this chance. Captain Doyle clenched the yoke. The passengers held their breath in silent chorus. At 200 feet the plane leveled, roaring forward with no engines, only momentum and belief. The landing gear slammed onto pavement harder than usual, but, miracle of miracles, straight. Tires shrieked. Metal groaned. But the plane was down, alive. And then, as if scripted by fate, the 2 Raptors in parallel formation execute a soldier's ritual few had ever witnessed. Both pilots snapped to attention, sitting rigid in salute inside their cockpits. Acknowledgement is not given lightly. A recognition that true skill, true heroism, can wear an unexpected face. In that moment, the boy in 12F was no longer a passenger. He was the pilot whose call sign had reshaped destiny. The plane rattled to a stop at the edge of the runway. flashing lights already clustering around it. Passengers burst into applause, shouts, tears, and embraces echoing through the cabin. Nobody could quite grasp it. The idea that the reason they were still alive was because of the boy they had watched sipping juice only hours earlier in seat 12F. A boy who, moment ago, had stood in the cockpit and taught professional pilots how to glide a powerless Boeing through the sky. A boy with short curls, dark skin illuminated by cockpit glow, and eyes that carried conviction of someone far older than 11. As emergency crews guided stairways toward the doors, the captain removed her headset. For a long second, she simply stared at him, this child who stood shoulder to shoulder with her in the cockpit. What you did, her words caught. It shouldn't have been possible, and yet you did it as if you were born in the sky. She extended her hand slowly, not as a formality, but as a salute. He shook it, small palm against hers, still trembling faintly from adrenaline, but his voice was even. My job is to keep people alive. Today was just part of that job. The businessman who had sat beside him clapped him on the shoulder as they filed down the aisle. Kid, you saved us. You really saved us. Behind him, strangers carried looks of awe, reverence, and disbelief, whispering snippets. That boy landed the plane. He's some kind of pilot. An 11-year-old. Each phrase grew into legend before it even reached the tarmac. And waiting nearby, the two F-22 pilots climbed down from their metal chariots, still wearing the solemn posture of respect. Raptor 1, a decorated veteran, approached the boy and dropped into a salute. Eagle, he said plainly, voice thick with reverence. In all my years, I've never saluted anyone younger than I mentored, but today is different. Today we salute you, sir. The boy nodded almost shyly. He was used to simulator rooms and briefing chambers, not adoration, but the applause that rose was deafening, as if the world itself had decided to bear witness. By dawn the next day, every news channel was ablaze with the story. Smartphone clips recorded the Raptors escorting the crippled jet, passengers exiting to safety, and the improbable reveal that a child, an African-American boy, wearing sneakers and holding a comic, was a hero who had outflown disaster. Headlines thundered across the world, asterisk the black boy who landed Flight 2178, asterisk youngest pilot saves 162 lives. Secret call sign, Eagle. Talk shows speculated endlessly. Was it real? Was it exaggeration? But then came the leaks, the whispers from sources too stunned to keep silent. Yes, he was part of classified programs. Yes, his call sign was in restricted databases. Yes, somehow, impossibly, the Air Force had a prodigy pilot hidden in plain sight. For him, there was no going back to anonymity. Military officials scrambled to manage the situation. Generals huddled around polished tables, arguing whether exposing his identity was a disaster or an opportunity. But at the heart of the conversation stood the boy himself, still only 11, his feet barely reaching the ground where he sat in the Pentagon briefing room. A stern general cleared her throat. Son, do you understand what you've done? His answer was quiet but steady. I couldn't let them die. If secrecy costs lives, then I don't want that kind of secret. That single line was replayed around the nation. Teachers used it in classrooms. Commentators quoted it at length. For countless parents raising young black sons who battled stereotypes and lowered expectations, here was proof that brilliance knows no boundaries of age or color. He became, overnight, not just a savior of passengers, but a symbol that possibility could be written in darker shades too, that genius and courage were not reserved for superheroes on movie screens, but could sit right next to you and coach, cradling apple juice. The Air Force faced an impossible dilemma. They had trained him in secret, certain the world would never accept the image of a black child commanding machines experimental enough to baffle adults. Yet now the world demanded to see him, to know him, to learn from him. So the generals compromised. They retired his cover identity, but gave him a new mission, to share what he had learned. You've flown aircraft most pilots can't even imagine, one senior officer told him. But now we need you to teach techniques every pilot can use. You've proven you can save lives, not in war games, but in reality. And so at 12, instead of hiding behind cover stories about boarding schools, he found himself standing on small platforms in lecture halls, teaching rooms full of men and women decades older than him. He could barely see over podiums and had to pull a microphone down to reach his voice, but when he spoke, silence followed. Pilots with 40 years of logged hours scribbled notes as he explained how to land with no engines, how to trust physics when machinery failed, and how to stay calm when everything screamed disaster. His examples weren't hypothetical. "This is how I saved Flight 2178, he would say, pointer stick indicating diagrams. His young face lit with certainty. Those lessons saved other crews within months. Jets crippled by catastrophic failure landed safely using his techniques. The ripple of his survival expanded across continents. But not all rewards were military. In classrooms far from flight lines, children read about him in news clippings their teachers printed, wide-eyed that someone their age, someone who looked like them, could shift history. For young black boys in neighborhoods that never whispered fighter pilot as a dream, he became not science fiction, but evidence. His presence told them they were not too young, not too limited, and certainly not invisible. He shattered the quiet ceilings laid upon them, ceilings he himself had already flown far above. Fame grew, but fame was not what he chased. He still loved comic books more than press conferences. In quiet moments, he let himself be a child again, building paper models of planes, laughing at jokes, and reminding anyone who asked that heroes didn't feel heroic all the time. Yet even as his youth showed, responsibility never left. At 16, he was invited to stand before Congress and presented with medals for aviation safety. Cameras flashed as he accepted the honors, but in his eyes was the same humility he carried in Seat 12F. The belief that courage isn't loud. It's choosing to act when silence will be easier. And in the ceremony audience, survivors of Flight 2178 cheered louder than anyone else. The businessman who once offered him peanuts spoke at the reception, voice thick with emotion. I thought he was just some kid reading comics. Turns out, some kids reading comics can save the world. Years rolled like clouds, but his legacy did not fade. Manuals distributed to airlines included entire sections called Eagle Procedures. Training simulators worldwide ran modules inspired by his commands on that day. And wherever new pilots gathered, his name surfaced not like a myth, but as instruction. They studied him not because of his age or color, but because he had proven physics bent to courage, and because when impossible arrived, he answered. Still, he remained grounded in who he was. The boy from 12F, the black boy underestimated until the engines failed and the truth revealed itself. His office at the Air Force Academy displayed one photo, him slouched in his seat that morning, comic book on his knees, looking every bit like the child strangers assumed he was. It reminded him, and everyone who visited, that greatness hides in ordinary disguises, waiting for a moment to emerge. When asked years later what it felt like to be saluted by F-22 pilots, he tilted his head thoughtfully and grinned. Honestly, I was just scared my shoelaces would come undone while I was walking to the cockpit. Laughter followed him everywhere. But behind the humor lived an unshakable truth. That boy who began as a hidden experiment transformed into a beacon far brighter than secrecy could contain. And the lesson he repeated again and again echoed across auditoriums, air bases, and classrooms. It doesn't matter if you're young. It doesn't matter if you're underestimated because of the color of your skin. What matters is what you do when people need you most. And so, when travelers today settle into Seat 12F on any aircraft, some pause and smile, remembering the tale. They might glance at the sky outside the window and imagine the shadows of raptors standing guard. They might even whisper a thank you for the boy who proved that impossible is just another word until somebody redefines it. And though the world remembers him as Eagle, to the passengers of Flight 2178, he will always be the kid, the black boy in Seat 12F, who carried them back to Earth on wings of courage.